If you bought an Oldsmobile Cutlass in 1977, you were one of 630,000 buyers who purchased a Cutlass in that particular model year. Yes, I said that right. 630,000 of these 1977 Oldsmobile Cutlasses were sold in just that 1 year, including 124,712 Cutlass Supreme Brougham coupes like this one. Although this particular Cutlass Supreme Brougham coupe has a number of special options that you're not going to find on other ones. You'll see those in a moment. But the Cutlass was a supremely popular franchise for Oldsmobile during this time period, and the sales had really grown from about 380,000 in 1973 when the first so-called colonnade-style Cutlass was introduced in that model year, to this point, as Americans were downsizing their vehicles, and frankly, customers were increasingly pleased with their Oldsmobiles, and the Cutlasses in particular, as product offerings. It's really no wonder why, when you drive one of these, you can see, by the way, the car does have T-tops. But first of all, the styling of these vehicles was great. Oldsmobile took a cue from the Olds 98. You can see here this Cutlass Supreme has vertical taillights, and that would be a feature of Cutlass Supremes for a number of years to come. And that design cue was borrowed, as I said, from the Olds 98, which was borrowed from the Cadillac. So this DNA of the Cutlass has a little bit of Cadillac in it. And in truth, the car was kind of a mini luxury car, especially if you got a Cutlass Supreme Brougham like this one. But if you drive one of these Cutlasses, you'll find that it's pretty easy to understand why the car was such a great seller. The Oldsmobile V8s under hood, which in this case is an Olds 350 cubic inch V8, were wonderfully smooth, very reliable, and quite powerful for the time period. The cars also handled very well. Many magazine articles, when the Colonnade Cutlass was introduced in 1973, and in particular the Cutlass Salon, compared the car to a contemporaneous Mercedes. And that seems pretty humorous, but remember, the Cutlass Salon did have some very sporty corduroy seats to it. The suspension was firmed up pretty considerably, and the car did handle very well despite its solid axle rear suspension. And in fact, many of the magazine tests found that the Cutlass was actually a great handler. It performed well, and it did a number of things better than the Mercedes. It had a better HVAC system. It was quieter on the inside. Its engine was even smoother. The transmission shifted more smoothly than the Mercedes. But of course, the suspension system was not as complicated, or in some subjective judgments, as good as the Mercedes four-wheel independent suspension, which endowed the Mercedes with better handling, particularly when somebody went around curves that had bumps. The solid axle suspension would get upset, and the rear end would kind of float in those cases, versus the independent rear, which would allow the car to stay much more planted. But regardless of those comparisons, the Cutlass swelled in popularity, and it really just did almost everything well. It had great power, great looks, great interior comfort, quietness, refinement, and the car also had remarkable resale value. So if you bought one of these, you certainly weren't losing your shirt if you went to sell it after a few years of ownership. In any case, this particular Cutlass Supreme Brougham, as I said, has a number of unique options, one of which are those T-tops that you see there. This is a really rare option, and this is, by the way, a one-owner original car. The original owner still owns this vehicle, and he's cherished it ever since he bought it. This was the last year for this particular body style on the Cutlass. The rode atop 116-inch wheelbase if you got a four-door, or 112-inch wheelbase if you had a two-door like this particular vehicle. In 1978, the car would be downsized, and it would shrink in wheelbase down to 108 inches, both for the two-door as well as the four-door. And we'll talk about the four-door and the saga of it, let's just say, later. In any case, this particular vehicle has this beautiful waterfall grille front end, and I think it's one of the best Oldsmobile front ends, certainly of the period. But the story behind this is that the designers were allegedly laying a piece of paper with a picture of a grille over top of a clay model in the studio, and it just happened to be draped over the front end as opposed to being stuck on in the front of the car. And the design chief walked in and loved the look of it on the vehicle in the form of this waterfall grille, and that stuck, and the car was produced. And this front end was really only produced for 2 model years. It was introduced in the 1976 model year. And by 1978, the car, as I said, was redesigned and that waterfall grille was gone. Although that twin port theme lasted on Oldsmobile for a number of years. That was introduced in the 1968 model year. I'm not sure why Oldsmobile had the twin port theme up front, but they did. And while this particular Cutlass is equipped with an Olds 350 cubic inch V8 underhood, you could get a number of engines in your Oldsmobile in 1977. The standard was a 231 cubic inch Buick sourced V6 making 105 horsepower. It was standard in the Cutlass as well as even the Cutlass Supreme. It was not standard in the Cutlass Supreme Brougham though, in which case you got a 260 cubic inch V8 making all of 110 horsepower. Yikes. That's not very much for a car that weighed, well, about 3,700 pounds. One up from that is the 350 that's under hood in this vehicle that made 170 horsepower and was an Oldsmobile sourced V8. One up from that was an Oldsmobile sourced 403 cubic inch V8 making 185 horsepower, and that was the top dog engine in these Cutlasses. So everything from a Buick sourced V6 to an Oldsmobile 403, that 403 being a small block Oldsmobile engine. It's the only Oldsmobile engine with Siamese cylinder walls because the bores are so big, 4.35 inches compared to a 3.38 inch stroke. Anyway, take a look at this interior and see what makes a Brougham a Brougham. Loose cushion seating, which Oldsmobile had pioneered in 1972 with the Olds 98 Regency, had now trickled down to the Cutlass Supreme Brougham. Although it has this kind of Native American style pattern, I think was what Oldsmobile called it during the time. And a nice piece of faux wood grain applique there over the barrel vents for the air conditioning, just to give you a touch of luxury, but not too much. Let's swing around to the driver's side and take a look at the instrument cluster. This particular vehicle has the optional gauge package, and this instrument cluster, here's a picture of it being conceived by Marv Fisher in sketch form. You can see that's the dash. It's a overall handsome instrument cluster, is made for easy serviceability for a service person to pull out. It's made so that those pods can be pulled out and instrument panel bulbs, etc., can be replaced very easily. Notice this car still has even its seatbelt guides. Those typically break. Overall, just a super handsome vehicle. And I don't think that the next generation was, let's say, as attractive as this one. This 1977 Cutlass is really from the time when the Cutlass was on top. And again, it sold 630,000 cars. Just the Cutlass. Oldsmobile was selling 1 million cars as a division in 1977. But these were the years of the Cutlass being super popular, and you can easily see why. Thanks again for watching this video. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment section, and be sure to like and subscribe. Check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you.